David Day, thank you so much for coming down to ThinkTech. We are very excited to have you as always.
It's great to be here, Jay. Good to see you again. Good to see you again.
David, you do so much traveling. You're an international lawyer, and you spend a lot of time in Asia. And you have a story about cell phone structure in North Korea. I do want to hear about this. What's going on?
Well, it's pretty exciting. Interesting development in North Korea that having to do with mobile expansion, mobile use, and the big picture is this, is that in 2002, North Korea started its cellular coverage. 2004, the regime shut it down because of their fear of spread of information and so forth. In 2008, the government set up a joint stock company, or JV, joint venture, with an Egyptian company called Orascom. Interestingly, the Egyptians hold 75%, and the North Korean government holds only 25%, which is really something.
A relative negotiating position,
Yeah.
I think.
So what happened over the course of 2009, and they started December 2008, 3G service, and over the course of 2009, 120,000 subscribers in the new 3G network in North Korea. Now, bear in mind, the phones cost the unit roughly $195. It's a prepaid service in a country where the average salary wage is like $8 a month.
They really care.
They really care. They really care. And this joint venture company called Koryolink is projecting they're going to have millions of subscribers in North Korea over the next 5 years. And that has enormous ramifications for technology, for government stability, for possible regime change, and it relates to a number of other big pictures. But
let's explore. Let's go through them one by one.
One by
I'm
one.
So interested.
Okay. Well, as a part of the 3G setup, it's reported, now I haven't been there, so I don't know, but it's...
I know you think about it plenty, though. You've done a lot of reading, writing, and speaking on the subject, so...
Yeah, I've spent quite a bit of time this last fall in Seoul. And what's fascinating to me about the mobile development is that it's part of a big program that the North Korean government is into that's set to culminate in 2012, 2 years from now, and we'll talk more about that. That's called it's like their 5-year plan, and it's called to become a mighty and prosperous nation by 2012.
Learning something from the Chinese, eh?
Yeah, they are.
No more nuclear. Now we're going to do technology and prosperity, eh?
Well, this technology is very fascinating because not only do you have this 3G network set up, now I got some conflicting reports as to whether or not the internet access is available to certain subscribers in Pyongyang only. But if you take the number 120,000 subscribers, it's more than just the elite military leadership. There's some ordinary citizens in there now.
Yeah.
Okay, so in addition to the 3G setup, to help that, my understanding is that the regime is now setting up a fiber optic cable network in every province in North Korea.
And now, so you don't need that for cell phones, so this must mean something else is happening.
Something else is happening. And that leads us into maybe some discussion about this whole 2012 mighty and prosperous nation. What's up with that? Because that is technology big time.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the big picture, and then we'll get into some other technology which when I first heard about this, I just went, wow. Because normally, right, when we talk about North Korea, we're thinking about the hermit kingdom, malnutrition, right, and buying and selling of the dismantling of the Yongbyon nuclear reactor and nuclear missiles and all that kind of stuff, right? And you don't normally think of technology. But technology is going to change that country big time, and so let's explore this together.
Well, let me ask you, before we explore the implications, How about the reasons? Why is he interested now? What has changed? What has happened to make him take this new direction?
Okay. Well, that comes back to this what we might call the 5-year collective plan, the goal of a mighty and prosperous nation in 2012. So in 2012, what happens? The significance of that to the North Koreans is this. It is the 100th anniversary of the birth of the great general Kim Il-sung. It is the 70th anniversary of the birth of the current leader, Kim Jong Il. And with some, let's you and I call it cheating, on the actual birth date of the youngest son, Kim Jong Un, it's the 30th birthday, now revised, of the heir apparent to the regime, Kim Jong Un.
So they're setting it up for the next regime.
They're setting it up for the next regime. 30th anniversary. And this, the youngest son, Kim Jong Un, educated at the international school in Bern, Switzerland. Because North Korea is the last Stalinist regime, and its transfer of power is done on a hereditary basis, this is something that's a real challenge for the Chinese, because they don't believe in this hereditary transfer business. And so in recent times, we've seen Kim Jong-un with several trips back and forth to Beijing, working with the Chinese so that they can kind of bolster the transition and movement of power.
You know, you got to give him credit, really. You think of Kim Jong-il as a kind of hermit, you know, recluse, who only has dark thoughts and sits up there in Pyongyang, sort of grousing.
Right.
But in fact, he's very connected to the Western world. In fact, he educates himself on everything. He probably has good broadband up there.
Well, I mean, at the end of this program today, Jay, I think you and your viewers are going to see a totally different side of Kim Jong-il and what's happening, because technology is driving, inevitable, it's driving change. So if we go back into history, think about what happened to cause the collapse of the Soviet Union. Back in those days, there were no real cell phones to speak of, no internet. But what they did have were faxes. Mm-hmm. And the prosperity of other peoples and freedoms of other peoples was communicated with around the Soviet Union by fax. A lot slower.
So why would Kim Jong-il adopt a technology that could bring him down?
That is the double-edged sword of a mighty and prosperous nation. It's a double-edged sword, because in order to attract foreign investment, they have to have the technology. To meet the goal, they have to have the technology, but the technology has enormous potential to block either transition to the youngest son, mm-hmm. or regime change.
I think he wants to leave a legacy, Kim Jong-il, and this is the legacy he has chosen. He wants to be like China. He wants to be prosperous, and the world should see him as an incredible, emergence from a state of darkness to a state of light.
Well, that's right, and the goal, the plan is, as stated by the North Koreans, by 2012, they want to be as economically powerful as they perceive themselves to be militarily powerful. And so what's happening now is that throughout the country, they're in this mad scramble to attract foreign investment. And in order to meet this goal of a mighty and prosperous nation, and this 3G network mobile phone service is just the tip of the iceberg.
Egyptian company?
Egyptian.
Of all the companies in the world who can contract for a cell phone infrastructure, that'd be the last choice I would have made.
I have no idea why they chose Orascom. I really don't. But what I do know is that in recent times they've rewritten all their foreign investment laws, and they've started all these trade missions to attract more foreign direct investment. And recently we've seen the National Defense Commission, okay, these are the military leaders, remember, early January of this year, the National Defense Commission came out with, I think, one of their first public statements, and they declared a holy war, a jihad, if you will, on South Korea. Well, it turns out that that National Defense Commission has recently set up a central investment bank in Pyongyang, and they are now clearly emerging as the entity in North Korea that's in charge of the whole economic expansion, the mighty and prosperous nation in getting to the goal.
So interesting. You know, they were trying it out with that economic zone near the 38th parallel, and I don't know if they,
yeah.
I don't know if they made all that much progress with it, but now they're really going a lot further, and it sounds like they want to find their speed with an economic development, and they want to compete with South Korea, and they want to be known for rapid development. This is not an easy chore, though.
No, it's not. But what's happened over the last decade that we as Americans have missed, and it's because, perhaps rightly so, our government and our media have all been focused on issues relating to nuclear proliferation and the possibility of some terrible implosion within the country if Kim Jong Il should die, been focusing on the disaster side, the missiles, the kidnappings of Japanese nationals, those kinds of things. And what's happening is the IT sector in North Korea has exploded. And it's so that this mobile phone business is just a facilitating technology for some other stuff that's going on that that we should talk about. And for instance, probably, I suspect there's not one viewer out there that knows that Walt Disney, one of its staff, Walt Disney Studios here in the United States, has identified North Korea as the situs, the location for some of the top animation work being done in the world now.
Why? Cheap labor?
Cheap labor and highly skilled labor in the IT sector, in 2D and 3D graphics.
This is already happening then. They're already on the way.
They're on the roll. And you know, if you look at the IT sector beyond mobile phones, you see a number of Chinese firms, Japanese firms, South Korean firms, and European firms now outsourcing a lot of their back office operations, software design and development, into North Korea. It's unbelievable. There are several major Japanese financial institutions that have their back office work done by North Korean IT companies.
You know, you predicted this. You gave a talk, it has to be a year or two ago, and predicted there would be a denouement in North Korea. And it looks like it's happening right now. But the question is, how can you do repression and prosperity at the same time?
Boy, that is a challenge. I don't know the answer to that, and I suspect if we focused on that for a minute, my conclusion would be is you can't. Once you start building a middle class, that is the death knell for the regime. As people become more educated, as they're finding out that their neighbors to the south, in Seoul and South Korea, are not impoverished, as the communications are going around North Korea now as to amounts of money that people are making. Imagine these workers at that Kaesong, the industrial zone there just north of the DMZ that Hyundai helped develop. The human rights advocates say, my God, you're only paying those people $30 a day to work in a Nike factory or whatever it is. Unbelievable. $30 a day. And yet the average wage throughout the country is $8. So $30 is $30 a month, sorry. $30 a month, I misspoke, versus $8 a month. So the word is spreading around. My gosh, if you work in the free trade zone, you'll make a fortune. And the IT industry in North Korea, by relative standards, very highly paid. And so now we see, for instance, if you take, I don't have one, but if you take a Samsung mobile phone, the software that's embedded in that phone was made in North Korea.
Cheap labor and qualified labor.
Qualified labor.
How are they getting qualified, David? I mean, this is not easy to learn. You have to have schools and classes and instructors and texts and whatnot. You have to have computers.
Well, let me paint the picture for you. There's a state-owned operation called the Korea Computer Center, okay? And so that's basically a big campus like you've seen in other high technology parks around the world. And so this was established in 1990. And it has regional branches, if you can imagine, in 11 other cities in North Korea. And this KCC has something like 2,000 people, highly trained technicians working on all kinds of IT issues for clients of this state-run organization. And so that the education comes in three interesting ways. Some of it, the technicians are sent out of North Korea into China and taught by Chinese or by Indian professors. And then there is, in Pyongyang, there is a very large university called Kim University, Kim University of Technology, which does a lot of their training. And then the third piece, that to me is totally fascinating, and it's something you and I have talked about before, was predictable, but nobody knows about, is that this fall, a Korean American by the name of James Kim, who's kind of a missionary zealot, Kim is going to open in Pyongyang the Pyongyang University of Science and Technology. And this is an American-owned private university.
Good idea.
And it's brand new. They've already got 400 students enrolled. They don't quite have enough faculty. And they have full internet connection already, satellite connection, and supposedly, I don't know, but supposedly, Mr. Kim says they've got academic freedom.
Well,
I find that hard to believe.
How much are they going to pay the faculty? $8 a month will not do it.
$8 a month. Well, but you know what's interesting is that that's the first that I know of, the first American business that's going to be up and flying.
It's true. There's nothing happening right now. So, you know what's interesting is, correct me if I'm not right about this, but there's not a lot of North Korean students in schools in the U.S. You know, they've been marginalized diplomatically. They can't come to school here and so forth, as a rogue nation, if you will. And so they don't have the benefit, as a lot of Asian countries do, of our school system and all the education that flows out, especially in technology. So they had to learn this, you know, themselves. And the school is really a big change. And I bet people locally here in Hawaii could get jobs in that school in Pyongyang, don't you think?
Oh yeah, I mean, can you imagine what the world is going to be like? You know, that behind this American university that's being set up in Pyongyang now, there are 4 American companies that are going through the licensing process with the Treasury Department. And this is the U.S. Treasury Office of Foreign Asset Control, which is the kind of the last licensing line of defense that the U.S. has before American businesses can go into North Korea. You know, you got the UN sanctions, and then you got, you know, U.S. laws that prohibit certain kinds of businesses from getting involved in North Korea. Well, these 4 firms, one of them is in a consulting firm, one is an energy company, other than nuclear, understand that. One of them is in the hydroelectric power field, different kind of energy. And the 4th one is a mining company, because North Korea is a rich country in terms of its natural resources. And so these firms, American firms, are now pressing the Treasury Department in the licensing process to get the green light, to get underway. And of course, the Treasury Department is working on this one problem with these firms, and the rest of the government has got its restart of the 6-party talks and working with the United Nations and nuclear proliferation, all these other issues to deal with.
You know, on the one hand, it would seem that a country that has been repressed and starved in the way it has, you know, is a great candidate for rapid prosperity, rapid economic success, because people have been waiting for it. You know, it's a coiled spring kind of thing. On the other hand, you wonder, sort of like the entry of East Germany into the European zone, whether their repression will slow them down. So what do you think? Are they a coiled spring, or are they going to be reluctant to get into the prosperity that we hope for?
Oh, I think they're a super coiled spring. And here's the reason. If they look to the south and get relatively accurate information, they see to the south a mighty and prosperous nation. In fact, South Korea in 2009 was the first of the developed countries to officially come out of the recession. The South Korean economy is on fire. And then they look to their powerful role model to the west, China. And in the IT field, Jay, China built its whole IT sector effectively over 5 years. And I'm sure that the Kim family is looking at China and saying, you know, if they can do that with the concept of the North Korean Juche, we can do it, and we can do it better, and we can do it faster.
Well, I think, isn't that the way technology works? You know, it took a long time to develop a telephone system across the United States, because we were
I still have some problems with mine.
We still have some problems, right? But, you know, it took a long time because we had to invent it on the way. But the technology is generally available now, and how hard is it to get that? It's very easy. So if you wanted to build an infrastructure across North Korea, it could be done in no time. And this goes for all kinds of other things. So the result is it could move faster than China moved. It can move faster than any country in Asia, because the technology is there, the technology is available, and if they want to do it, they can get right up to the highest standard in almost no time at all.
Well, in the IT field, for instance, the caliber of the technicians that are available in software design and software development is just, the level of expertise is very high right now. I mean, let's face it, you do not build guided missiles without a fairly sophisticated IT sector.
I guess so.
And so, I mean, they use the ISO 9001 standard, the CMMI standard, and Six Sigma, so that this Korea Computer Center, the state operation, is really had several spin-offs. And one of them is a fabulous animation studio that's doing animation work for a lot of the Nintendo games for Chinese television advertisements, and very popular in Japan, some of the animation games and software that have been developed in North Korea. And so that you know, if we set aside the focus on weapons and nuclear challenges for a moment and look what the other aspects of development are starting to take place in the country, there are signs that I think your coiled spring analogy is right on the money.
Well, the interesting thing is that the young son goes to China, and presumably China shares their lessons with him. And so maybe there's a kind of an alliance brewing with China, an economic, relationship. Query, how hard would it be to establish that kind of relationship with other countries in the region, such as, for example, South Korea? I know that the cord was cut between North and South Korea in an almost complete way for decades and decades. How much trouble would it be? How likely can they succeed in reestablishing economic relations with South Korea?
Well, I mean, I guess the simple answer to that is if you go to the DMZ, right near the DMZ, there's a rail line that comes up from Busan in southern Korea. And it stops right at the border, but you see the tracks go on through the DMZ up to North Korea, and those tracks continue to the economic trade zone at Kaesong. So there are trains that take workers up from South Korea there. But the point that I want to make is there's this big, elaborate, modern train station that's built there that's not used. And it was built because that was going to be the reunification point. And this group of private Korean citizens funded this enormous station. And in the land around it are all these huge empty warehouses, presumably to warehouse goods being transshipped up into North Korea.
The coiled spring.
The coiled spring. And so that if you have some of the major chaebol companies in South Korea already doing business with North Korea, Hyundai, for instance, the former chairman of Hyundai was from North Korea, and his daughter-in-law, I guess, is the one that is in running the company now, has done a lot to restart relations between North and South Korea. Traveled to visit with Kim Jong Il this past year, and so their facilities, their manufacturing, and Samsung with its use in the high-tech sector. I mean, you look at the technology that goes into software for PDAs, for multimedia types of things. A lot of that can be done and is being done for some companies in North Korea already.
Well, they've seen the success in South Korea. Maybe they'd like a piece of the action.
Well, I'm sure you're right. I'm sure you're right. Yeah.
So, but how does this mean that we're not going to see any more nuclear table banging? That we're going to see them take a more nutritious role vis-a-vis the U.S. and other countries, or is this technology effort all in aid of more weapons?
Well, that's a difficult question to answer, really. I think I'm not qualified to predict how the North Korean government is going to act, particularly vis-a-vis the U.S. on the nuclear side of things. I mean, they have a different agenda, and I think that Washington has not ever really figured it out. I don't believe the North Koreans are going to give up the nuclear weapons. They want to be known as a nuclear power, and they would probably like to have diplomatic relationship with the United States at some point in time, but they're not going to take a step backwards and give it up, which is a very difficult precedent when you go to another country like Iran. So I think that that's going to go nowhere. But the technology, in order to develop the country, they can't do it growing rice or other agrarian society. They've got to convert.
Want to be a player, if you want to be a Western type of player, you really have to adopt the Western technology right now. Well, I say global technology because it isn't Western anymore. It's everywhere. So this is really an important thing. I know we're sort of we're transforming the one event, the cell phone, into all kinds of other things. But it sounds to me likely that it is a symbolic development and it will lead to other things. How do you see it unfolding over, say, 5 years?
Well, I think if we if we start with James Cameron's film Avatar, and it's very easy to see that just in the entertainment field alone, there's going to be this enormous explosion over time of a whole new world in terms of 3D animation. And the requirement for graphics, animators and cartoonists and all that, and painstaking, labor-intensive work is just going to multiply like crazy. And I don't recall the budget for Avatar, but I do know that it was a pretty stiff number.
Substantial, but
And
the revenues have been extraordinary.
And so there's going to be a push to try to drive that bottom line, improve it, and so to cut the cost. And so North Korea is going to provide a solution for that. So you're going to see, I don't know, somebody like Industrial Light and Magic out of San Francisco. They will have an operation in Pyongyang.
Looking for that expertise and the cheap labor. You know, it's funny though, technology doesn't know boundaries. Technology it reaches across boundaries, and that has to happen in any state, in any country, which has a growing technology industry. So all the people who are shut in now, they're completely repressed right now, at least traditionally, for years and years. Now they're going to have an opportunity to see what goes on outside, to communicate with people outside, and to find out about the other life, you know, and they're going to want the other life. It's the American dream, isn't it?
Yeah. And then as you start to build a middle class, or you have maybe not a middle class, you get a little wealthier poor people, they start going after that dream that you've talked about.
Yeah, the emulation.
And you know, it's kind of like letting the genie out of the bottle, you know, or the horse out of the barn. You know, there's no halfway. And so that this whole process of the mobile phone network that we've talked about, the development or look into where their IT sector is, it has enormous ramifications for the direction and future of the country. And what we would want to see happen is we'd want to see the country develop and progress, and that people become wealthy enough so that when there is a transition of power, however it occurs, or a regime change, that we do not have a unbelievable humanitarian crisis foisted on the world, the likes of which we could not even imagine. I mean, if there was an implosion in North Korea by the government, we would have a situation that would make Haiti look like a kindergarten party. I mean, the starvation and rogue groups with weapons and all kinds of challenges there with
the fall of the government.
If the government were to really fall. And so what we would like to see, I think, is that this 2012 goal of a mighty and prosperous nation, let's not get hung up on the words too much, you know, and the fact that their economy, they want to have the economy be as strong as their military. But I think we do want to see them develop in their IT sector. Actually, Jay, I think the IT sector has to lead the economic development of the country.
Well,
it has to.
That's the way it's worked elsewhere. There's a part of the IT sector that I'd like to mention to you, and that is, and I'm recalling some footage that you showed me one time about somebody who took a hidden camera into North Korea, driving around in an automobile with the camera taking pictures, and it was all sort of cloak and dagger because you couldn't take the footage out of the country.
Right.
You couldn't take the footage at all. So the natural progression from cell phones, in fact, cell phones have
the
video
camera
on them.
That's right. That's right.
You go a step further, now you have more video. You have video everywhere, and of course you can use video to repress. You know, you can put it on the street light and watch everybody, but you can also use it to expose, and you can use it for transparency. Well, that's going to take cell phones with the voice and data, and then take the videos on top of that. You're going to have a transparent society in almost no time at all. It could lead to problems, but it could also lead to, a great emergence as well.
And the question is,
Which
way is it going to go? And so that this whole IT development. I mean, you look at, you take a company like in Pyongyang, the Gwanmyong IT Center. And this is in Pyongyang, North Korea. It's very close to the Taedong River. And they produce antivirus software. They produce data encryption software, data recovery, fingerprint analysis, voice analysis stuff. And that particular firm is very active internationally. It has an office in China, and it does work for some of the major financial institutions in Japan already.
You mentioned energy before, and in this context, talking about these successful companies or possibly successful companies, isn't the limitation of energy, I mean, the unavailability, the lack of available electrical energy a problem for this kind of expansion? I remember, I think you showed me this photograph too, of a satellite picture of the Koreas. And south of the 38 parallel, as if on a boundary, this light at night, and north was dark. The whole country was dark. And you say to yourself, they don't have infrastructure, they don't have electrical power, and they don't have a grid. And how are they going to do this without having a grid?
Well, and they can't expand the economy. They're going to have to be able to supply power. So, I mean, one obvious piece of it is they have the nuclear technology, and so that I think that's inevitable that a piece of their grid is going to be nuclear. I mean, I would be surprised if it wasn't. And the other part of it is if you just look at these limited, and I admit, these limited applications of American companies who want to go into North Korea, if you look at their basic strengths, you see out of the four companies, two of them are energy related, and so that clearly a recognition by American firms that there's opportunity there to build that grid.
Well, that leads me to a question that emerges from this conversation. That is, what can an entrepreneur, a young entrepreneur, maybe a seasoned entrepreneur, what can he do, or she? What can they do to get involved in what could be an extraordinary national boom over the next few years in North Korea? How do you start, particularly given the fact that it's hard to get there?
Well, in the last several months, the Korean government, as a part of this 2012 initiative, if we can call it that, one of the things that in the scramble for foreign investment that they've done is they have opened up the country for American tourists. Now they're looking for the tourism dollar.
Can I go there now?
You can go there now, and I can go there now. And there are tours set up. You have limited access, and they're going to take your mobile phone at the border, and you're not going to be able to use your mobile phone. They're going to wrap it up and put tape around it and hold it for you till you leave the country. You will not travel with your mobile phone. And you go to selected places, you'll have guides with you all the time. And so one way for a young entrepreneur to start is to kind of get, now that this little window is open for Americans, is to get in there and see a little bit, talk a little bit. The second route I would take, particularly for entrepreneurs in the tech field, is you want to get a hold of me if you need to, but you want to communicate with a man by the name of Paul Tija. Paul has the GPI consultancy in Rotterdam, Netherlands, and GPI's specialty is in brokering IT outsourcing into North Korea from European firms. So a number of Dutch firms are having their back office. By the way, Heineken beer is now in North Korea. And,
that'll improve the place.
And DHL is ready to serve you there. They're already there in North Korea. But GPI Consultancy is a firm that specializes in IT outsourcing. And through Paul Tija, that's how these entrepreneurs could get connected up. But recognize that there are still some challenges for American firms in place because you have to look very carefully at the legal requirements for the UN sanctions to see if the company or the work falls with any of the prohibited areas within the scope of the UN sanctions. Then you have to look at the US compliance, and they'll have to, if they're actually serious about it down the road, they might have to get or they will have to get the blessings of the United States Treasury.
So David, you know, it's the old story of the Asian country, you know, coming up in the world and, you know, setting up a new effort, a new initiative to become industrialized and, in fact, high-tech. And if you wanted to go to start a business in China now, there's a whole gamut of people who would be available to help you. You have to pay for it, lawyers and, you know, people who could facilitate for you. Is there such a structure in North Korea? Is there somebody you can pick up the phone and call with your cell phone and get his help or her help, you know, to build a business there?
I don't know the answer to that because I haven't found anybody yet. And I would be very surprised if something like the Pyongyang Chamber of Commerce is set to go for that type of response. And clearly there's no AmCham Pyongyang, at least not yet. And not likely to get a whole lot of information, because I've looked, scrambling around in Seoul. And so the best connection that you could make would be to find some Japanese firms that have got business going there, or Chinese firms. And at the moment, the answer to your question is, as far as I know, no.
It's interesting, though, you say Japanese firms, and they're, you know, they're clearly a democratic and free society. They're very Western in their way of doing business and government and all, as opposed to the Chinese possibility. You know, these are two different possibilities. In the Chinese possibility, you know, you have decades of rule under the communists and so forth, and the way the government works would be a lot different than the way it works in Japan. And so, which one will succeed as we go forward? I mean, it's easy to see that you need lawyers. It's easy to see that you need an American Chamber of Commerce and all those structures that we have in other countries. And I'm thinking of China because I think China somehow is a closer parallel. Even though South Korea is nearby, China is a closer parallel. Do you agree?
Yeah.
So you would look at the structure in China and say, well, somebody's going to get the idea to use the same structure in this newly opened society of North Korea, and you'll see that, so that somebody who's familiar with what's going on in China has an advantage.
Well, another way to do it along the same track would be if you go to Beijing or Dalian or some other major Chinese city, and you can do the research ahead of time, and you look at where there are operations for some of these North Korean IT companies. And they will have a rep office in Beijing, and it's through them that they're going to have to provide the structure for you. And you could contact Koryo Tours to get into North Korea as a tourist, for an example. And there are a couple of websites that for this, we've talked about this Korea Computer Center, and I am sure that they would be more than happy to start trying to assist an American entrepreneur. But bear in mind that two things are going to happen. One is the fact that an American entrepreneur is knocking on the door. That's big propaganda value within the country. Big propaganda value. They've already started talking about these 4 firms that are trying to get in. And the second thing is that an entrepreneur has to be very careful on the legal side to look on the backside to watch out for U.S. Treasury Department approval and licensing before going too far. I mean, it's one thing to have some preliminary discussions and kind of check out the lay of the land, but it's another thing to start actually putting action behind it.
Well, how about looking in the front side with the North Korean government, who may want to ensnare that entrepreneur, who may find himself in an uncomfortable legal relationship with them, where he has no negotiating power, you know, to protect himself, and so at the end of a period of time, he finds he's lost everything.
Oh yeah, oh yeah,
So-
and that would be no different. Really, no different than early entrepreneurs that went into somewhat similarly situated countries, like the early entrepreneurs going into China. They lost everything, some of them. And
They still do something.
They still do, right. And early entrepreneurs going into Vietnam.
Vietnam. I wanted to ask you about that too. I know you're very familiar with Vietnam. You've taught in Vietnam. You spent a lot of time there. And I wonder if you could give us a handle on the comparison as you see it between going into North Korea and going into Vietnam as an American businessman.
Well, I mean, there's no comparison at all, because today Vietnam has a full-on structure. And in any industry that you want to go to, it's simply a matter of contacting the embassy or the consulate in Ho Chi Minh City, get hooked up with the U.S. Commercial Service, and they'll partner you with the best available Vietnamese firms, and there's an AmCham in Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City, and lots of Americans already there. American companies, American law firms are there. Baker McKenzie has huge operation in Ho Chi Minh City and another office in Hanoi, and the same thing with Rusin and Vecchi. So that you've got, I think, White and Case is there. You've got an infrastructure and a legal system that by and large will protect the investor.
Yeah, my thought is that in Vietnam, although they didn't like us at first, for sure, as time went by since the Vietnam War, they somehow warmed to us and saw us as valuable investors and so forth. And the system that was created around all of that is very successful. In North Korea, they have very little experience with us. They have very little experience with this kind of system. And I wonder if that same kind of dynamic is possible in North Korea.
I think it's possible, but we have to remember that the actual, even though people say that both of those two governments are or were communist governments, that the Vietnamese leadership was a consensus-driven leadership, and North Korea is a hereditary. Kim Jong Il is the man, and so the North Korean fervor behind their leader is almost fanatic.
You know, there's no place in the world where that kind of government has nurtured a tech society. Repression and technology don't do very well together.
That's right.
Repression seems to douse technology, and technology seems to open repression. So what do you think is going to happen? Is the government going to turn democratic, assuming that technology succeeds, that there's really growth in this area? Is the government's going to have to change? How will it change? What do you see what do you expect in the next 5, 10 years?
Well, I see the transition as Kim Jong Il's health weakens further. He has to successfully transition the government to this youngest son, going to be 30 years old, give or take, 2012. He doesn't have any military experience, and so that has been in the prior leadership a good housekeeping seal of approval. And so that this young man, very well educated in Switzerland, is going to take over, and he may just be able to hold on to enough power to work a gradual transition. But remember, he's in his history, he's seen some collapse in the Soviet Union, and he's got the senior leadership very tightly controlled. And so we don't have anything that we've seen yet in the emergence of anything like an opposition party or opposition leaders. And so the danger is, if he can't navigate that smoothly, that there is a serious international crisis in the making, because that country, if the government falls, it will implode. And remember now, the military, they run around with nuclear warheads. And so it could be,
Oh,
you
and
have some rogue problems there.
threatening. I remember it was only a year ago where they had these photographs of all these missile silos, missile trucks, and there was a very interesting tech news item about how the trucks were painted in, and it was a falsified photo. I don't know if you remember that, just about a year ago. But if you were the American government, the State Department, the president, and assuming that you felt that a prosperity in North Korea would be a good thing, and that bringing technology and advancing some of these initiatives would be good for the region and good for American interests, how would you go about encouraging Kim Jong Il to go forward with this and to do it, with a sort of open the place up? What would you do to make sure it gets opened in the right way?
Well, the step one is that one of the problems Washington has had is that in any kind of negotiation or work with North Korea, they naturally, and we want them to do this, have been focused on their own interest. And that is to cut back or eliminate nuclear proliferation on the Korean Peninsula. That's what they want. So they negotiate from that perspective. But in order to answer your question, what Washington really needs to do is to try to see this whole situation from Kim Jong Il's eyes, and to say, what is his interest? Now, his interest is in, he's got to transition power to his youngest boy, and then he's got to preserve the stability of this whole regime somehow. And one of the things that Washington could do is look at trying to satisfy that interest, and maybe that is a big thing, some type of diplomatic recognition in exchange for something else that relates to the nuclear threat. But I don't believe for a moment that North Korea is ever going to give up their weapons. No way.
National pride.
Issue of national pride, that's right. And so what has to happen is that Washington really needs to, I mean, if I was given the advice to Stephen Bosworth, who is the special envoy to North Korea, I would say you have to focus on partially satisfying the interests of the regime. And that is, they've got to do a transition. And they got to preserve the stability. And we want that stability. We've got to have that country stay stable long enough so it doesn't implode.
It was only 3 years ago that George Bush was saying it was a rogue country, and along with Iran, treating it as outlaw. If we could bring it back into the fold of nations, it would be a great thing for American foreign policy.
It would be, but that's no, I mean, you and I can talk about what should be done and how do you do it, but that's easier said than done, because there are enormous suspicions on the North Korean side. And I give you one example that most Americans probably don't know about, and this is if you were to look at this from North Korean eyes or North Korean perspective, is that in 2008, North Korea was removed on the sanctions, the state list of state sponsors terrorism. And so the sanctions were removed. That was a big diplomatic victory for North Korea. All right? And so in exchange for that, the United States got them to dismantle the cooling tower at the nuclear facility at Yongbyon. You remember that? Well, what most people don't know is that the same morning that that occurred, that the administration in Washington immediately put them on a list under the National Security Act and reinstituted the same sanctions. So it's kind of like that Nicole Finneman of the Korea Institute uses this great analogy. Said it's kind of like the Indiana Jones movie where he's got this bag of sand and he's got this jewel and he switches them like that, you know. But it was a big diplomatic coup for the North Koreans. And so looking at issues of stability and regime change, I think that's where the answer is. And if we could begin to give them some kind of comfort or assistance in that, it doesn't mean that you have to prop up a dictatorship with all its human rights abuses, but there are some things you can do to keep the country from imploding and to give them some kind of confidence that you're not going to come running across the border as soon as they relax.
So take a big American company, take a global American company. And just for this discussion, and since it's had its recent issues and current issues with China, let's take Google. What would be your advice to Google? Should they consider North Korea, which is, presumably just beginning a broadband infrastructure, or should they wait? And what would they be waiting for to make their move?
Well, my advice to Google would be you outsource some little pieces of work, but you better wait, because I don't see, even with this Koryolink mobile phone access. There's some conflicting reports as to whether these prepaid mobile phones selling at $195 for the unit, they don't have access outside the country, and the conflict in information as to whether some of them can in fact go on the internet. And so that you got an internal telecommunication system within the country so far.
So we're not there yet.
We're not there yet.
The reason they wrap your outside phone up is they don't want you to communicate outside the country.
That's correct.
They still have a barbed wire fence around the country.
That's absolutely correct.
These phones they're a glimmer of light, maybe at the end of the tunnel, but right now it's only a baby step. Yeah.
That's right. It's just one teeny little step, and as you look down that tunnel, it's a long ways down there, I think, still to go.
I think you'll be following it. I hope you'll be following it.
I'll be
there.
following this.
When you find other glimmers of light about North Korea, can you come back and tell us about them?
Absolutely. I'd be happy to do that.
Thank you, David. David Day, international lawyer in North Korea. Aloha.